Turning service teams into dynamic spiritual communities. Part three. What do spiritual leaders do? Well, mostly they invest in other people. Second to that, they create community. I want you to think about your ministry or your team for a few minutes. Who is the target audience? And for whom are you doing ministry? With whom? And the best way of thinking about this is to think about this as layers. So I'm going to use our children's ministry as an example. So our top layer here, the one with the trees and the topsoil, obviously is the focus. It's the public face of our children's ministry. It's the children themselves. So our children's pastor, her primary focus in her children's ministry would be the children. But then under that, you have that second layer, and that second layer would probably be parents, family members of the children that our children's pastor focuses on. Below that, you have your team, the people that show up week to week to make everything happen. And below that is what I would call the support, the people that are funding it, that are bringing food, that are helping in other various ways. So, first of all, you got the children, right? And it would seem obvious that if you're in children's ministry, the ministry is for them. And that's probably about 70% of the focus, right? So if you're a children's pastor in our church, you're spending a lot of your focus on the children themselves. But those children come with families, and you can't rightly love on those children without, by extension, having some contact with and support for and encouragement to the children's parents, families, so forth. Then, of course, you have your team, the people that are there each Sunday, each Wednesday doing the work. They're not just there as tools, right? And they're not just a means to an end. They too are within your sphere of care. And I would think if, Tammy or one of our, our children's pastor, that a portion of her ministry is to them. Then of course you have your support. You have the people that are bringing food, maybe occasionally showing up to clean up or set up or whatever, and they are also a focus of this ministry. And so if you're a leader, you need to be thinking about who are all the people under my care, who are all the people within the periphery or within the primary focus, but who all makes up the spiritual community that I'm responsible for, and how much time do I spend on them? And I would say how much time you need to be investing is proportional to how much time you see these folks. So it may be that you actually see your team more than you see any of the other children. And so even though this may sound counterintuitive, it may be that you need to invest more time in your team because you're spending more time with them, you're also counting on them, and you're working together when the children are there. So it may be that you're actually investing more time in the people that are your right hand man and woman, right? Then, of course, you also want to be spending some time investing in the people that bring meals, that do set up. Now, you're not going to probably spend as much time with them. Same thing with parents and grandparents, but you don't want to neglect them altogether, and they are within your sphere of influence and part of your larger community. So the issue is paying attention, being strategic, and thinking about how you allot time and energy and so forth. Now, you don't have infinite time, you don't have infinite ability to care. That's why you really need to be thinking about it proportionately. You also need to be thinking about it strategically over time. Now, what do you do when you're with these folks? Well, you train them, you equip them for ministry, and to the extent that it's possible, you make yourself redundant. Now, this is one of my favorite stories out of history. At the beginning of World War II, Ja- the Japanese Air Force was a colossal. It was staggering, and their Air Force so overwhelmed our Air Force. We barely had an Army Air Corps, and we were really really outgunned. But there was a big strategic difference between the Japanese and the Americans. So the Japanese always flew their top aces. If they had a fight, they had a mission, they had a battle coming, they always put their top people in there. And then once all of those people were killed off, then they would call up the secondary people, so forth and so on. The United States Air Corps had a very different strategy. What they would do is they would fly their top people for a while, get them very seasoned, get them very experienced, and then they would pull them out of the cockpit. No longer were they going into battle. Their job was to train the new fighters. And and they continued this pattern, as did Japan continue their pattern. And by the end of the war, the Japanese were putting people into fighter planes that barely knew how to fly, and their Air Force was in shambles. On the other hand, the Air Force had more top fighters than they had airplanes to put them in, because they had trained and made people redundant and trained replacements, so that they had so many good pilots to draw from that they had more than they needed. That's the purpose of making yourself redundant. So your ministry goes beyond what you can do and outlives your tenure. Now, let me tell you another story. This one is about cooking bacon. So, in a church that I served, we had a men's ministry, and their primary thing, about the only thing that they did, is about once a month or once every 6 weeks, they would do a fundraiser breakfast. They would cook just one of the best tasting breakfasts. They would sell tickets and they'd give all the money to the missions. Now, here's the only problem. Maybe not the only one, but it's the one I want to focus on. Is that if you were new to the men's ministry, you literally had to wait for someone to die before you were allowed to do anything interesting. So the guy who cooked the bacon, for example, he had been cooking the bacon for 60 years. He was not about to turn that over to a new guy for anything in the world. He was going to turn it over when he died. And what that meant is that anybody new that showed up, they didn't really get a chance to do anything fun. They didn't get a chance to participate in leadership, because the old guys were hogging it all to themselves. Now, I understand why, but something important happens when we make room for new leaders and new people to get to do some of the fun things beside us. And honestly, for some of us that are getting older, it can be fun to be in the mentor role, right? Watching and coaching and encouraging the new people. Now, I'll tell you something else about getting new people and new leaders is that they come with new ideas. Or sometimes they come with ideas they think are new. But the thing is, they're enthusiastic, and we've got to be real careful when they have new ideas or even old ideas that we've heard before, not to shut them down, not to squeeze them out of the conversation, because there's no way to make a new leader or a new member of our ministry feel unimportant. There's no better way to do it than to tell them, hey, listen, we don't want to hear that. We've heard that before. Don't bring those new ideas around. Now, we don't usually do that very explicitly, but there's subtle ways of doing that. We have to be very careful not to do that to our new people. So, what do we do? Well, we celebrate, we thank, and we share the spotlight. Now, I don't know who said this originally, but I heard Ronald Reagan once say, you can get a lot done, especially if you don't care who gets the credit. One of the best feelings in ministry or leadership in general is when we've empowered people to do things that we maybe could have done just as well or even better, but now we get to celebrate their accomplishments. And part of our accomplishment was helping them achieve some of their dreams. So I would say that one of the biggest things that you are called to do in leadership is help other people achieve their goals, help them achieve their dreams. And when they do, be on the sideline applauding them and letting them have all the credit. Because after all, it doesn't really matter who gets the credit, right? We can get a lot done for Jesus if we don't care who gets to stand in the spotlight. So I'll remind you the key components of being a spiritual leader. Help your group stay focused on Jesus. Focus on the relationships within your group. Take care of your team. Develop community. Develop people. That, after all, is what turning service teams into dynamic spiritual communities is all about. Next time, we'll talk about who are you?